all the members of the boards and commissions, and wanted to make sure we had enough room for everybody. So we do. So our first agenda item is the economic development plan discussion, and the City Council has been working for the better part of a year. I think we actually started in February of last year on embarking on a journey through economic development and learning about a variety of different tools that are available for economic development and meeting with a number of different municipalities and talking about different projects. We've embarked on a visioning work with the group Civic Canopy. So it's been quite a journey through quite a number of educational opportunities for us. And part of that was also designating and creating a think tank, which we'll hear from today, a group of 5 individuals who come with incredible expertise and experience in this field and have spent the better part of a half a year working on what they would recommend to help us through our economic development process. So I put together the world's first PowerPoint by Deb. So, but yeah, it's my first foyer into PowerPoint. So it basically is a quick PowerPoint that takes you through and I have to turn around, through our economic development process and what it is that each step of the way, what we did. And it may not be in exact chronological order, but it's close. Well, here, you guys have that one.
No, I'm for everyone else.
Okay. Well, when it gets that big, it gets crazy. Okay. Economic development, or economic vitality through economic development. We started out with 5 goals and intentions to gain an understanding of economic development strategies, risks, benefits, feasibility, and practicality, to gain a knowledge in the area of private sector business development, to gain a clear understanding of municipal government and private sector development, to gain insight to an economic outlook for Littleton, which allows us to consider all current conditions, and well-informed knowledge of best practices, collaborative opportunities, regional synergy, and innovative thinking. We started out with a presentation from the city manager on various economic development methods. He went through extensively a variety of incentives that are available, and I'm not going to read each of these. You can see what they are, including incentives, tax incentives, different job creation incentives, etc. Then he talked about community partnerships, partnering within your own community and also the region, and with educational institutions. And then we talked about financial tools, different grants, urban renewal, general improvement district, business improvement district, transportation improvement districts. And then we got the think tank started. And the think tank, it consists of these 5 men and women. And you can see without a doubt that they are definitely outstanding in their fields, and we have definitely got a top-notch group of people who volunteered their time and their energy and their effort and their thoughts to help move us along, and we're anxious to hear what their thoughts are this evening. We heard from Glendale, and Mayor Mike Donovan came, and he came with his deputy director, and the one thing that really, I think, stuck with all of us was, as Glendale went through explaining all the crazy nuttiness of Glendale, which in any world it probably shouldn't exist. It's sandwiched. It's actually just a hole in the middle of Denver. It still remains Arapahoe County. It's less than a square mile large. It has 3 single-family homes, but they have a spirit and a can-do attitude over there, that they come up with some wild ideas and they figure out a way to make them happen. And it was interesting because I think one of the things that we all realized was what Glendale does, but it's interesting when you look at what other municipalities are doing and how they do it and how they approach things. And so while we may not want to embark on the rugby capital of the world moniker, we definitely learned some things from him. And I think that the "we don't start with no" is tantamount. And if I can just relate a quick story. I recently met with Mayor Mike, and we were at the Alamo, and he said, you know, we almost had this. And I said, the Alamo? He said, yeah. I said, Glendale? He said, yeah, they looked at us first. He says they came in and they wanted to put it in Glendale. They'd done their research, and he said, we blew it. I said, did you start with no? And he said, my contractor started with no. So I said, we didn't. So, come on, I'll treat you to a movie, Mike. So I think that was, I mean, it was definitely not something he was proud of. It was definitely something that fell through the cracks, but it fell through those cracks, and it was an opportunity then that we were able to definitely take advantage of. And then we also we talked about Lakewood and Belmar, and Belmar's quite a massive story and an interesting story. Mayor Murphy, Mark Murphy came in, and Bob Murphy, good with names. And one of the things he said that I thought was powerful was, as he was kind of going through it and talking about all the things that they did and all the crazy amount of financing and the deals that didn't work and the partnerships that fell apart and then got reconstituted. He said, you know, to do something like this requires a lot of courage. And it was over such a long period of time that they started this, and then they're still building. I was over there Sunday, and they have a whole bunch of new townhomes coming out of the ground. And they created their own new downtown. They didn't have a downtown. They had a dead shopping center, and they created their own new downtown. And they did it with an awful lot of creative financing, private-public partnerships. Their 194-page loan agreement, 2,608 attorney hours just to get to a loan closing. It was the largest loan closing in the history of the state of Colorado, $250 million in one day. They really have created quite an environment down there, and if you haven't been down there to take a look at it, it is bustling. They created an environment where the goal was to make the car uncomfortable, and it is not fun to drive through Belmar. It is a difficult and challenging drive-through, and they did that intentionally. They built a huge parking structure, and they want people to get out and walk. So these are some interesting challenges that they faced, and it was a great learning from Lakewood. We held our economic development symposium, where Mayor Hancock, I think, started off with such a great quote. I can't read that in a little one. This is the time, this is it. We're all converged right here, right now, to do great things and to move this region forward. He's very much a regionalist, and it was very interesting how he and the city of Denver is being so inclusive and so supportive of all of the suburbs surrounding them, and really seeing us as a hub of economic development. So Denver Mayor Michael Hancock was there, Tom Clark, Phyllis Resnick, and Paul Washington. And Phyllis Resnick, as she kind of wrapped up with some of her doom and gloom on economics, but she said to survive in these economic times, it will take leadership and courage. And that was really her closing words that evening, and I thought that was kind of resounding. We also had Kelly Duncan, VP of Philanthropy with the Colorado Health Foundation, and she came, and it was a great knowledge of what it is that, as an economic driver, how the health of a community can be an economic driver and attract companies, not only companies that want to relocate to healthy environments, but companies who are health-oriented. And since we really do have a community that I think has a leaning towards the health, we've got a great medical center, and South Park has a lot of great medical arms and legs over there. We've got the new Health South, and we've got a great active outdoor community too. So this was a great education for us in terms of how that all ties together to be an economic development driver, which I hadn't really thought of before. When Paul Washington, who's the director of economic development for the city and county of Denver, when he was here for the symposium, he didn't really get to go into the depth of the 7 pillars that we had wanted him to. So we brought him back and got to spend an evening with him talking about Denver's design of the 7 pillars and how they reached out to the community and the businesses and have built a economic development structure that they are it's using and tweaking and working and having great success with. And so I think we all walked away from that with a lot of great ideas and appreciation for what they're doing. Ann Ricker from the Ricker Cunningham Group, she joined us and she spoke on urban renewal, the fundamentals, just basic 101, didn't get too deep into the finances and stuff, but it gave us a nice, I think, tutorial on what urban renewal is and how it works, and she gave a number of examples. This is one, the city center. We all remember Cinderella City, and now that what they've created over there in Inglewood was all done with an urban renewal, so that was an interesting. She also talked about a variety, and I don't expect anybody to be able to read this, but a variety of different taxing, financing, authority type things, which was a lot of them are absolutely not applicable for us, but it's interesting to see the variety that's out there and the options. And then we embarked on a visioning program with our friends at Civic Canopy, where council had an opportunity to just kind of sit down and talk based on what we were learning and feeling and what we all felt were our goals, and kind of just share that and have a number of brilliant people in the room that were able to take our ramblings and our thoughts and put them into a cohesive visioning for us. And we will have the final presentation on our visioning and then our some additional follow-up this evening after the economic development portion. And I thought it was interesting, without vision, people perish, King Solomon, and that was actually a quote that Mayor Michael Hancock used when he was at the symposium. And then I just want to send out a big thank you, because it's clear by the slides I've shown and the number of people that were helping us along this, the number of businesses and cities and mayors and city managers and community leaders, regional leaders, that all gave of their time. We didn't spend a dime on any of this. They came willingly and freely and gave us their thoughts and handed over PowerPoints if we asked them. And I also want to thank the staff, because the staff has been incredible about helping us understand this and reach into new information and providing us information that we've asked for, and then working very, very diligently on what we'll see this evening is an economic development plan. So just a big thank you to everybody who helped us, because we don't do this by ourselves. We do this with an army supporting and helping us. And then just on the final slide, forget all the reasons it won't work and believe the one reason that it will. And I just think that's kind of a nice way to kind of look at moving forward, and kind of back to Mayor Mike's don't start with no. So that's it for a journey down memory lane. Did I miss anything?
No, you did well.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and move to our economic development plan discussion. And Tom, come on down.
Thank you.
Oh, we're getting the technical piece done here. There are a couple of quotes there that I particularly liked. Without vision, people perish.
Right into that mic there.
Right into the microphone.
There you go.
Without vision, people perish. I think the other thing, without vision, people tend to get lost because they don't know where they're going. And I think that's particularly apropos for what we're talking about tonight, which is, where is it we want to go? As I was the one tasked with putting this presentation together, I couldn't resist the opportunity to actually give you a little bit of background as to who I am and what we do when I'm not helping you from time to time on these sorts of things. I work with a company called Newmark Grubb Knight Frank. We are a global real estate company, real estate strategy, work in 5 continents, 340 offices, over 11,000 professionals. And what we do that's sort of interesting is we actually play in both strategy and real estate, which seems to be a bit unusual. The world is full of people who will tell you how to do something, but they're not very good at maybe defining that strategy of figuring out where you want to go. It's defining the roadmap. It's figuring out how and why you should do something, not whether you can do something. So this notion of actually taking a look at how you can achieve certain things in the context of whether you should is very important. It's critical to our business. We actually do advisory work to economic development agencies, cities, states, regions, inside and outside the United States. We advise multinational companies on where to locate, site selection. We help companies figure out how and why they should be looking in certain places. So we have an interesting lens of real estate and cities and the engagement of the public and the private sector in ways that are particularly interesting and useful, because they're actually taken from the pages of what actually happens in how people make decisions to locate businesses, to locate major investment opportunities. So, what we were given, this illustrious group that I had the opportunity to work with on this, were some very simple council objectives. And I'll read through a couple of these. First and foremost, assure financially sound government. You know, that sounds really easy, but I think as all of us know, especially over the course of the last 5 years, there are times when it starts getting less easy. And the decisions that you make now actually have far-reaching consequences over how the city will be governed for the next generation or two. These decisions are not being made in a vacuum. Point number 2, provide a safe community to live, work, and play. Interestingly, without a financially sound government, objective number 2 is simply not viable, is it? Number 3, develop and maintain the public infrastructure. Not surprisingly, without the financially sound government, number 3 also doesn't tend to work very well. Number 4, preserve and cultivate a quality community. Preserve and cultivate tends to connote active management, reinvestment. In order for that to happen, it kind of goes back to number 1, you need to have the financially sound government in order to enable that activity to happen. 5, pursue a balanced and sustainable local economy. Well, this is almost a manifestation of 1, right? How do you achieve 1? You achieve it by getting a balanced and sustainable local economy. What does that mean? That means that you have an economy that is actually reliant upon itself. You're not relying upon external factors. You have people who work here. You have people that play here. You have people that shop here. And that interreliance actually creates the balance and sustainable economy that you're talking about. Number 6, promote environmental sustainability. This is a given. for the community going forward, not just our community, but all communities. Number 7, foster community involvement, communication, and trust. Transparency. You have to tell it like it is. We believe you. We elected you to go up and represent us in making the tough decisions, not just the easy decisions, but the tough decisions. So, why are we here? Because the economic balance is out of alignment. What we talked about, the slide previous, pursue a balanced and sustainable local economy. Well, today, we don't have the same attention being paid to jobs, housing, and retail that we should. As a consequence, we have maybe attention in jobs that's not getting the attention it should. We have retail that for a number of years has been something we have been actively not pursuing, which is causing our economy to be out of alignment, out of balance, in a state where it's no longer sustainable. We have people who live here that shop somewhere else. It's not that they're shopping somewhere else by choice, it's that the city is not really providing the mechanism for them to be able to shop here. I don't think we're going to change the behaviors of those people and say shopping isn't good. Of course they're going to shop. We want them to shop. We want them to invest. We want them to reinvest within our community. And yet we're not providing them the ability to do that within our borders. Jobs. Jobs are changing. We are in the midst of some fundamental economic shifts. The last 5 years are going to have consequences that we will be looking through and discovering for the next generation. How people live, how people work, how people shop, it's all changing. What does that mean? That means, you know, if you look at the future of an office development, it's not going to look like the Denver Tech Center anymore. You know, the community today, we have a generation coming of age that is not interested in separating their work life from their home life. They're interested in more of an integrated, sustainable environment. Interestingly, what they're interested in is something that Littleton was founded on many years ago, which is this sense of balance. So if we look at what that might look like, it's having equal focus on employment, on business, on housing, so that we're thinking about not how people worked 20 years ago, but how people are going to work 20 years from now. And that is changing. You know, the traditional office environment is giving way to non-traditional work environments. You know, alternative workplace, people who are working for different companies, but actually choosing to work in the same office for a variety of reasons. For the mental stimulus that comes from that, number one. Number two, for the cross-pollination of ideas, being able to bounce ideas off of other people. Google, interesting example of this sort of in the extreme. What they do is actually have people cohabitating in offices who do different things in order to force cross-pollination of ideas. And now you're actually seeing offices getting set up around the country to encourage just this sort of behavior where you have people from different companies co-locating, cohabitating within the same office in order to get that same kind of idea. Is that going to be the single move of the future for employment? Probably not. But it's something we ought to look at. We ought to be thinking about it. We ought to be anticipating what's going to happen so that our community can be actually in the forefront of some of these changes. Retail. Retail, too, is changing. You know, it used to be that you had to actually drive to the store to shop. Now you don't. You know, you can get Amazon Prime, shipping's free, and everything comes in 2 days. I don't know. It's interesting. So why do you go to shop? Well, part of it, we're social creatures, right? We do it because we choose to. So there is a whole different form of retailing that we need to be paying attention to, we need to be thinking of, we need to be anticipating, we need to be encouraging. housing. You know, it's interesting. What's old is new again. People love the idea of being able to walk to restaurants, to businesses. Well, that's rather like Main Street in Littleton, isn't it? Again, what's old is new again. So what this does, you end up with a very poorly designed graphic that I did on the plane yesterday of what's supposed to be a stool. It's a three-legged stool: property tax, sales tax, and employment tax, all of which support community services, all of which we need to be paying a lot of attention to. And sales tax is one that I think if you were to go through and sort of dig underneath the surface, has the greatest potential to deliver to that, really, the ability to address some of these community needs that you all outlined for us. So by taking this multi-pronged approach, employment, retail, housing, what we end up with is an economy that actually is sustainable. It's self-sustaining. You're not having to rely upon neighboring communities, and neighboring communities are not having to rely upon you. Of course, you live in the context of the Denver metro area. That's not going to change. But what this does, it makes you less dependent upon what other cities do and gives you more flexibility as we move forward in our next generation. So, what's in the economic plan, what I prefer to call a strategic plan? These are aspects of business, retention, attraction, employment, transportation, traffic flow, community services, education, housing, amenities, forward thinking. No surprises here. I mean, it's a very obvious list. It's a list that any of us, if we sat down in a room and thought about it for a few minutes, would probably come up with. It's the organization of these that really takes a little bit more thought. So going back to what the mayor said in her opening remarks, remember the Alamo.
You said that?
Sort of.
All right. My interpretation of what the mayor said. It's important for us to remember the Alamo. Nothing happens by accident. It's incumbent upon us to actually craft where it is that we want to go, lay the roadmap to figure out how to get there. So all of which says actions have consequences. Inaction is as much a deliberate action than any action you choose. So I've got a little Robert Frost quote up here. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and this made all the difference. The path of least resistance is not necessarily the path that you should be continuing to make here. It's the one that has been made. It's the one of not making the tough decisions. But making those tough decisions, choosing not to make a decision, is actually what's created this situation for us today. The community requires reinvestment. It requires deliberate action. It requires deliberate strategy. You know, think about it in the context of your house. If you choose not to maintain your house, what happens? It starts falling into disrepair. The community is no different. It requires deliberate action. It requires reinvestment. That reinvestment is what will enable the community to continue forward. As I said before, the economy is shifting. We need to anticipate that. We need to be able to make decisions embracing that. We need to be aware of the opportunities that we've missed. We need to understand why, and we need to learn from that. So, as I like to say, there is no status quo. Stability. You can say that you're in a stable community, and we are. You know, I've been a resident here for 16, almost 17 years. It is a very stable community, but stability requires reinvestment. Reinvestment is what allows the community to remain stable. Absent reinvestment, the stability falls into decline. So some of the affirmative goals, this gets pretty optic here. I'll try not to go through the whole thing, just put a couple of highlights. We talked about it. It's retaining and strengthening existing businesses. It's interesting. I've had this discussion with a client that I'm doing some management consulting for, helping them grow their revenue. And all of their economic development activities are focused on new customers. Interestingly, across the board, 70% of your growth tends to come from your existing customer base. I mean, it's true sort of year in, year out, regardless of business or industry, it's a great rule of thumb. So how much attention are you paying to those existing businesses? Do you know what they need? Do you know what they're facing? Do you know if they're growing? Do you know if they're shrinking? It's very important. Attracting new businesses, being very deliberate about that. The mayor talked about some of the toolkits that the city manager has put on the table. These are really important. Other communities are being very engaged and deliberate in the process of how they go out and attract new business investment. And I can tell you, because of the business that I'm in, businesses actually pay attention to this. Site selection is done on an exclusionary basis, meaning businesses who are looking to make a significant investment look for reasons to exclude certain areas from those investments. If you're not providing the incentives that other people are, if you're not open to investment, you don't get a crack at this business investment opportunity. They'll simply be looking at communities that are more welcoming of their investment dollars. It's an interesting process. So some other points on here. Increase the city's population with housing developments located along major transit lines proximate to retail and service hubs. We have some amazing resources here in our community. We have light rail. We were one of the original light rail stops. We've got 2 right smack in the middle of the city. What are we doing with those? What can we do with those? They're very expensive areas to develop. Infrastructure cost to replace the parking that might be on the surface is extraordinary. It's the kind of thing that the private sector cannot do on its own. But it's also the kind of thing where the public sector can make a meaningful difference, can actually catalyze development, enabling things to happen that otherwise wouldn't happen, and actually having a cascading effect through the community, enabling more reinvestment. So these are what we took as being affirmative goals in the plan. City assets. The city, this is a wonderful place to live. I choose to live here. You all choose to live here. It's great. The hometown feel, schools, light rail, Main Street, lots of different residential choices. The open space, the Platte River, community events, the education level of our workforce. There's a tremendous amount to like here. The question becomes, how do we organize this? What do we do with it? How do we position it? The challenges. This is not my list. This actually came out of a list that the city put together. Business attraction. How do we attract those businesses for the reinvestment or the new investment? Limited vacant land. The city is an infill community. We still have parcels that have yet to be developed, but the major metropolitan area has grown around us, meaning that even those undeveloped sites are today infill sites. Then there are questions of perception versus reality, perceived limited downtown parking. Everyone loves to be able to, get the spot right in front of the restaurant when they walk in. That's not always going to happen. Over time, I certainly would like to think that that perceived limited downtown parking becomes real limited downtown parking as additional development happens in support of some of these, more appropriate clusters for density, areas around light rail, areas around existing retail, existing office, existing mixed use. We have areas that are frankly in need of reinvestment, underdeveloped properties that maybe have become functionally obsolete, aging shopping centers, underperforming shopping centers. Retail options. As I said, retail is changing. Are we changing along with it? Do we have the ability, do we have the development to actually go out and anticipate and embrace what it is that people want today? Have we been proactively doing that? I don't think so. So these challenges are ones that are not new, ones that we certainly understand. Opportunities. There are opportunities out there for direct economic benefit. How do we go out and increase property tax, sales tax, employment tax? It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It has to happen in balance with the quality, the nature of the development. There are opportunities to increase indirectly economic benefit, catalyzing investment, targeted areas, reinvestment, redevelopment, this is hard. This is very hard trying to get in the position of trying to define at what point something should be improved. How do you encourage significant reinvestment rather than paint? Paint lasts a few years, but some of these opportunities, some of these maybe original neighborhood shopping centers have the opportunity, I think, to be significantly reimagined and repurposed in a way that absolutely engages all of the trends that we're talking about happening today from the standpoint of housing, from the standpoint of employment, from the standpoint of retail. How do we enable that? I mean, that's huge. There's a significant opportunity here to improve the city's image. And from that, I mean embracing development, embracing investment, encouraging reinvestment, what I call raising the bar. What does that mean? That means actually getting involved in the process. That means actually working with property owners, developers, to help figure out what something can become. How do you make it better? How do you actually get engaged in the process and maybe provide some tools to encourage certain kinds of things to happen? Some of the assets that the city has are absolutely extraordinary. How do we use those? In some ways, maybe actually going back and looking less at the zoning that's in place and more about what could happen there, and then trying to figure out, is there a way for what can happen to match with a rational zoning plan in order to, again, raise the bar for what happens. For these few limited infill development sites that exist and the redevelopment sites, are you going to be satisfied with the path of least resistance? What I would argue is a suboptimal or maybe even, mediocre plan? Or do you want to shoot higher? Because you can. We can. And this last point, embrace the community that used to define Littleton. It's a little harsh. I don't mean it to be harsh. It's Main Street. It's this engagement, actually going out and embracing mixed use, which I don't think our zoning code encourages much of today. I mean, there's a little bit of that. But how do we make it better? How do we actually set the table for some of this to actually happen? Do you want it to happen to you, or do you want to guide what happens? So target areas, no surprise. Infill development. There are a few undeveloped or underdeveloped parcels. Get involved. Get engaged. Look at the tools that are available to encourage the kinds of things that you want to happen. And look at a carrot and a stick approach. Here are tools that are available if we can actually get to a point where I think everyone wants to go. And maybe those tools aren't available if you don't want to go there. That's fine. It's not your property, but it is your city. So it is open for you to influence. Redevelopment of functionally obsolete buildings. Sometimes that's repurposing those buildings. Sometimes it's recognizing that the purpose and the viability of those buildings has passed. And it's putting tools in place to enable that sort of catalytic change to occur. Transit-oriented development. It's taking advantage of the assets that we have, organizing them, using them in order to make our community fabric that much stronger. So within the plan that we put together are a number of challenges, issues, and solutions. I don't know that you want to go through all of those in painful detail. Suffice it to say, there are tools that are open to you that can be put into place without putting the city at risk, without creating financial risk for the city, or at least being able to manage that risk against the incoming revenue. All of this requires a plan. It requires deliberate thought, it requires deliberate action, it requires deliberate engagement. It requires going through understanding what those tools are, the tools that actually we've already talked about. The mayor talked about in her opening remarks. It's tax increment financing, it's tax sharing agreements, use tax rebates, permit fee, abatement. I mean, there are a number of things that you can do. The question is, how do we organize them? Which are the ones that are appropriate and for what reason? And let's actually be engaged in enabling the discussion now, before it happens, to embrace the opportunity to use them when it comes. People need to understand that the city has changed, that the city is actually open to the idea of working with and for businesses that want to invest within our borders, that we want to encourage that sort of thing because actually that's what creates the sustainable community. So with that, I would go back to the Robert Frost quote and ask you to take the road less traveled by. We have this plan for your consideration, and we'd like to thank your adoption. It sets the table for actually moving forward to make some of these significant tools available. It doesn't mean that you're deciding today to use them. It simply means that you're open to considering them for specific opportunities and enabling staff to start opening those discussions and figuring out how we as the city can help raise the bar and show how it is that we too can be different. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Would you, before we take questions, would you introduce your additional think tankers that are here, please? We've got Andy. Okay.
2. So we have Sarah Rockwell and Andy, and I'm terribly embarrassed, I don't remember Andy's last name.
Hancock.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay. I got Mayor Lakewood's first name wrong. We're even.
Yeah.
Council, any questions?
I'd like to have a copy of your PowerPoint. I mean, I know we've got a lot of that in what we have, but I'd still like a copy of your actual PowerPoint.
My pleasure.
And then I'm curious how you see the recent projects that have been approved or actually here, like the Draft House, and then the brewery that's coming, will get here in a couple of years. How you see that contributing to the way we were going to go? Because it seems to me that's like having cranked the engine pretty good.
I agree with you. These are very positive steps. I think it's terrific. It takes time to build momentum. It takes time to earn a reputation and to change a reputation. And these are very positive steps in moving forward. And I think some of the things that you outlined here today and that are also within the plan help take that even further. So I think what they do is actually build upon the momentum that you all have helped generate.
Then another question. And you touched on this. The internet shopping. I think there's going to be more and more of that. So trying to attract at least some bricks and mortar, not all, but some, isn't necessarily going to address that. So I'm not, now, and I know there are people, even some sitting in this room, who do not want to pay any tax on online purchases. But it seems to me we're going more and more in the direction of online purchasing. We can't buy a house online. Well, we could buy it and have it shipped here, but
You can.
But I mean, it ultimately has to. So, can you comment more on how you feel we can deal with that?
Sure. Retail is a very complex area. It involves aspects of human behavior, fundamental needs, as well as social needs. If someone really wanted to live their life inside their house using the internet to buy everything, I think they probably could. But some of the trends that we're seeing are actually moving a little bit away from that people enjoy the engagement, actually going out. We are social creatures. We like milling about with other people, meeting other people. We like kicking the tires, so to speak. The retailers themselves are changing. They're actually embracing more true direct competition with the internet so that you could go into a Best Buy or a Target and they'll price match prices that you found online. Interesting. How does that change things? Not sure yet. But I don't know about you, but if I had the opportunity to get equivalent pricing in a store versus over the internet, I think I'd be more inclined to go to the store and actually be able to see it, feel it, touch it before I have it arrive on my doorstep 3 days later. I think that retail, to a certain degree, is sort of a pendulum. We have been moving away from bricks and mortar, but I think the demise of bricks and mortar retail is premature. It's my opinion. I think how it's organized may be different. I can tell you, let's talk some of the major category types. Big box retailing, Costco, Target, Walmart, they're not going away. They have very efficient delivery mechanisms. Their pricing is probably as good as you could get over the internet. But the kind of retailing I think that you're talking about is a complement to that. It might be what you'd find on Main Street. It might be what you'd find in Aspen Grove, where people aren't going there because they have to. They're going there because they want to. They're going there because it is a form of family entertainment. They're going there because they're looking for an experience. And that's the kind of experience you can't get online. Maybe that too will change. But then we'll be having a different discussion.
Thank you.
Bill?
Tom, Andy, Sarah, thank you for your work. I have a series of questions, so when the mayor turns me off, we can go through that. So, first piece is within the recommendations and the thoughts is taking a look at our other than residential corridors, taking a look at Littleton Boulevard, Santa Fe, Broadway, Mineral County Line. At least for three of those, there's existing corridor plans that are out there. To what extent did the group take a look at or critique or not consider the specifics of those corridor plans?
I'll speak for myself, and then I'll turn around and put the other two on the hot seat. We looked less about the constraints of the existing plans and more about the potential. And I think that what you asked us to do was more looking at potential and how you might be able to harness and harvest that. Good.
Okay.
We're in agreement.
One of the things that's out there is in taking a look at sustainable economics for the city. You talked about sources of revenue, and I'm going to ask the group, so you can also put your compatriots online or on notice for that, is the city doesn't necessarily differentiate when there's a commercial zoning between retail and sales tax development versus what I might say could be an alternate commercial use that's not residential, as long as it's not industrial or agricultural. So recognizing that, when I read through, it talks about looking to bring businesses to Littleton with a bias that commercial means more retail. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, for two reasons. One, because I think there is a tremendous opportunity for us to try and harness some retail potential. That's something that we have specifically not been going after. And it has a significant economic impact. Two, because retail is not going to be mutually exclusive with other commercial uses, job, office type uses. So I think there's the opportunity for us to make very thoughtful and intentional developments that incorporate both. But I think from the city's standpoint, it's very important to actively convey that you're interested in retail.
Okay. It has a connotation of picking winners of sorts than not, so a little bit.
Well, I think it's less about picking winners and more about changing some of the perception that's really been out there for the last 10 years or so, maybe longer. Perceptions take lots of time and effort to change. I think people understand that you're open to employment. We are open to employment within the city. I don't think they get that same feeling relative to retail. And this is not something that's unique to Littleton. This is something that most every large and mid-tier city is facing right now. Is how do you embrace retail? Do you want to embrace retail? And it is a complicated, thorny topic.
Well, I don't disagree because it involves more of a recruiting as a passive. We have commercial space available. This city hasn't necessarily characterized that to profile. This is the type of retail we would like to have, and that's a significantly different role, I think, than
Well,
we're
and
taking.
that's the role that we've outlined, and pardon me for interrupting.
I wanted to make sure I was hearing that.
It is very important for the city to get proactive. The time for passivity has passed.
And then in the tool chest, very much I'm hearing make sure you have elements of incentives. And as I read through the document, I certainly had a sense of the city giving and giving and giving. The part that I didn't hear is where the funding source comes for that giving. That wasn't exactly outlined or specifically indicated. So that would be a question. Did the group have anything in mind, or is it left for others' creative devices?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it's important that what we're talking about here is actually not approving certain public funding mechanisms to be used, simply approving that they can be used. So this question of financial viability is something that gets handled on a project-by-project basis and should be handled on a project-by-project basis. In no way, shape, or form would I be up here saying, use them all every time, you know, the bar's open. Mm-hmm. That's not the road to sustainable financial.
It's a road that's
Right.
been traveled that doesn't end up in a good place.
Right. This is the importance of actually some of the work that we've done helping establish the baseline. But moving forward, it's actually being thoughtful and proactive about where it is that you want to go and establishing a real business plan to get from here to there. We haven't done that piece yet.
Yeah.
That whole business plan of what are the tools, how do you want to engage them, where do you want to engage them, and how do you actually start being more proactive in an area where the city historically hasn't been. I mean, this is all something that's going to take a fair amount of work. But I think what we're doing here today is, you know, at least posing the question for all of you to consider whether that's work that's worth doing.
I'll hand the baton.
Bruce, and then Bruce, and then, okay. Bruce.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, absolutely fabulous work. Greatly appreciated. It's a wonderful stake in the ground and a touchstone for us to be able to use point forward. Couple questions. One, maybe, well, I guess they're both somewhat general and maybe somewhat specific at the same time. The first question I'll ask is, about 6 years ago, we actually had, there had been a fair amount of work done as well as some background, both with the staff and with some external resources. I'm putting together a corridor plan for Broadway north of Littleton Boulevard. So say Littleton Boulevard north to the Englewood line. And conceptually mixed use, certainly retail oriented with some other amenities, entertainment, so forth and so on, were attributes of a plan that could have worked potentially in that neighborhood. And from a practical standpoint, accepting the economy obviously going south in 2008, this preceded that, but certainly people may have been leery of investing because it was getting frothy. Nonetheless, what I understood, the feedback from the staff over some period of time thereafter was that there was a lot of opportunity to do things in that area, but they had an extraordinarily difficult time getting the landowners, the various parcels pulled together, forget about someone to come in as a developer. So I guess my first question with all that context is, mechanically, what advice can you offer in terms of that process? How have you seen it work functionally to a good outcome in other areas where you've got multiple landowners? Does it require front-end developer? Does it require the city to act as a catalyst, which I think we actually did a fair amount of, at least in conversation?
It's a complicated issue. You know, the short answer is, if you want to transform an area like what you've just described, it can't happen without some city sponsorship. It also can't happen without property owner buy-in. Ideally, what you want to do is have the two coincide, and make some of the property owners aware that this is something that you may have interest in, make them understand how it may be beneficial to them, to see whether the door is open. And if the door is not open, focus somewhere else. You've got, this is really an allocation of scarce capital resource question. There's no sense pouring money into something if the property owners have no interest in pursuing it. But also remember, just because they said no at one point in time doesn't mean that the answer will forever be no.
Right.
So it's okay to have a concept maybe outlined in a plan, in a framework, to suggest that the city might be open to this happening in the future, without maybe the city going significantly down that road today. Leave the door open.
Part of the messaging process.
Exactly right.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask you to expound upon had to do with the repurposing. You talked about repurposing of some of the older shopping centers to the new retail environment. And you talked about housing trends, and actually very much liked some of the comments you were touching on in the document in depth. And the two seem to me to make a lot, to go well together in terms of the mixed use. I don't want to maybe couch it as mini Belmars all over the place, but it strikes me that, or South Glens, but it strikes me that the patio home concept for seniors, where you're freeing up the housing stock for younger families, which supports schools, which generates predominantly more sales tax revenue by virtue of the fact that younger families are buying more taxable goods locally, so forth and so on. So I wouldn't necessarily say it was a keystone or a linchpin, but maybe it is at some point. So, I mean, talk a little bit about your guys' thoughts and concepts with respect to test bedding something, approaching someone, and were there areas that maybe some of the how question again. How does somebody go to a shopping center where maybe it's underutilized, but maybe the rent checks show up every month, and maybe it's an out-of-state owner who likes getting the rent checks, who doesn't want to put capital in, that kind of thing?
Well, again, the specific properties were less an aspect of our focus. We looked at some almost more as a proxy for the kinds of opportunities that we as the city may have. The answer is going to be, I think, different for each. I mean, there is no cookie-cutter answer. My planning friends would probably shoot me for saying this, but it's important to understand what can happen in each location, not to try and, take the prototypical mixed-use, new urbanist environment into every infill, because it won't work.
Understand.
But, so all of these are not going to be mini Belmars, but they can be really terrific, exciting, engaging opportunities in their own right. I mean, this trend for us baby boomers as we continue to age, which we seem to be doing at a rapid rate, that's a fundamental transformation and an opportunity for the city, for every city, but certainly for ours. How do we deal with it? There certainly are more senior living opportunities coming available, but not as many as I would think. And, I think about, an opportunity to go visit my parents. If my parents were to move into a place, what would I want to go visit? I'd probably want to go visit a place that I might visit anyway, maybe with restaurants and shops around it. The kind of thing that is creating an environment where seniors who have perhaps some disposable income might go and patronize. It's taking some of the institutional aspect of senior living and turning it inside out. Maybe instead of having the cafeteria, you have restaurants where you can bring in paying customers. You have restaurants where people actually want to come and eat the food.
That is bold.
And you embed it within these communities, and lo and behold, some of these shopping centers that we're talking about, why, they're embedded within the communities.
Yeah.
I mean, you look on surface, and it's sort of interesting. I think the opportunity is there to do something really creative. So how do you signal that you're open to this sort of an opportunity? The first step is, I think, approving the kind of plan that we presented to you tonight. But it's not the only step. This has got to be a very deliberate process of engagement to show what are those next steps, what are the priorities, how do we deal with them, how do we proactively go out and maybe signal the kinds of things that we're open for. It's a slow process. The public process, to the extent that involves zoning and re-entitlement, that is a slow process, so it's going to take some time. The messaging is a part of it. The strategy is a part of it. The roadmap is a part of it, as well as how you treat each opportunity as each opportunity might come in along the way. And what are the messages that you want to send to developers today? Do you want to say, oh, someone's finally developing that property, hallelujah? Or do you want to say, yeah, but can you do better? And we're willing to maybe consider some form of public-private partnership to help you do better, to raise the bar.
Good. Thank you.
Bruce.
Thank you. You've been on the hot seat for an hour. You're doing great. Thank you.
And there's not even a seat here.
The nexus that you talk about with the employment, business, and housing, I think, is really important to this whole discussion. But I have a question, just in that context of potential. Did your group talk about, and can you help me understand, why high density is suggested as a response in a couple of the different challenges? I would like some help understanding how that can contribute to the overall health of the economic situation. And I'm looking at the realities of it's not a commercial property, it's a residential property, so Gallagher's going to limit the property taxes that it generates. From an individual basis, I'm wondering if we don't have the Target and the Walmart that those folks want to purchase items at, how do I get them to spend their money in Littleton? And where was your discussion with that?
Well, from the standpoint of density, which I think is your question, residential density.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the justification for why do you look at increasing residential density? First of all, you don't look at increasing residential density in a vacuum. It has to come within the context of existing entitlements. It has to come within the context of potential development. It has to come in the context of, how that can encourage perhaps adjacent reinvestment. So what residential density tends to do is there are a number of studies that show it does increase, has a direct impact on increasing adjacent property values. It has a direct impact in actually reducing traffic because you're taking cars off the road in mixed-use environments where people park and walk rather than park and eat and leave. So what you're doing is actually creating an environment where the retail can be more successful by virtue of the people who are living there. So you're creating an environment where people can walk to retail, can walk to restaurants, can walk to, perhaps their job. And I go back to some of the fundamental precepts that you all put out there, that you want the city, we really need the city to be sustainable. And one of the key ways to make a sustainable city is to actually increase density where it makes sense in some of these mixed-use nodes.
I think that's a great discussion that needs to have. There are several items where we have greater discussions in here, but I think that's one that, just for Littleton today and dealing with the strategic issues, that is a great discussion to have more of. Thank you.
I just want to point out, I mean, you've said this a number of times this evening. Every time you've said increased density, you've added directly behind it where it makes sense. I just think that's important. Jerry?
Yes. Thanks, Tom. In your report, page 2, under the second paragraph under introduction, you referenced the comp plan. Now, we have struggled for years trying to update the comp plan. We've brought in people just to help us move forward with completing the comp plan. What would you suggest so that we can actually realize that we'll update the comp plan? And we talk about it. Many of these things you've mentioned tonight we've talked about over and over, but yet we're not getting anything in writing to make it into the comp plan. What would you suggest at this point?
Well, I think it actually goes to the logical next step here, which is if you all agree that this is the sort of thing that makes sense for the city, then the next step is actually going through and trying to identify the tools, identify the sites where the tools might be appropriate. So it logically fits with the comp plan as the comp plan gets redefined this next go-round. I think they should work hand in hand with one another.
Okay. On page 6 of your report, under assets, could you elaborate on that first paragraph and put a little focus, if you will, into Littleton needs to rejuvenize its image?
The city, over the course of the last decade or so, has earned the reputation of being a difficult place to do business. It's earned the reputation of being a difficult place to do development, where, quite frankly, I think some developers, when they're looking at different communities for potential development ideas, might think that within the confines of the city of Littleton, they can't really get creative. They can't suggest where things should go. They can only work within the confines of maybe their existing entitlements, which says that we start sort of ratcheting down the bar of our expectations on what we can achieve, because developers are looking at a complexity factor for dealing here, for working here, working with the city, and rather than put money into good design, they're going to have to deal with a prolonged and arduous process of actually getting their project approved. That's what needs to change.
And last, one more. See, page 10 of your report, I believe it was under priority 8, number 3, where you mentioned the rental tax, and then in the last sentence, explain that one a little bit. Just give me a little more information on that.
Which last
It
sentence?
can be argued that multifamily units, through density alone, place a higher demand on city services without producing much revenue for these services?
And I'm sorry, your question is why? Why does that happen?
Elaborate, if you will.
Well,
I mean, what I'm hearing is that if density is so great, but here we're saying that it puts demands on the city where it won't necessarily produce the revenues.
well, this is why when I talk about density, I talk about it within the context of a mixed-use environment. Residential property tax levels are significantly below commercial property tax levels. And the more residences that you add, the more you are required to actually service those residents from the standpoint of schools, from the standpoint of police, from the standpoint of fire. So what you need is a balance of that density with commercial, retail, employment, tax generation in order to allow it to be self-sustaining. So the answer is not apartments everywhere. That's not a good answer. The answer is also not condos everywhere. It's not that it's a bias of apartment versus condo. It's density of residential by itself in a vacuum is not the right answer. What we need is a balance.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? Jim?
I guess more of a comment than it is a question, but assumes that the council adopts the plan as you've got it outlined here, and as the comp plan continues to be upgraded through its changes, it seems to me that more flexibility statements are more important to us than the specific plan that you're going to do, and that would, to me, would be more enticing to a developer, that you're not locked into a black and white situation because you've got some flexibility to move forward doing something else.
Agree completely. And if you look at sustainable development, in my book, what that means is you have development that can actually adapt over time to changing uses, so that you have the flexibility to repurpose the building in a functional and meaningful way over time. I mean, certainly there's the whole green aspect of it, but the greenest we can be is by actually creating a flexible framework to allow the uses themselves to be flexible. So I agree with you. You know, looking at zoning maybe more from the standpoint of uses and form base, trying to define what is the form that's allowable on different parcels. You know, there are communities that have done that. The city of Denver is one of them. And what that does is help remove some of the subjectivity and, you know, that may otherwise exist within the zoning and entitlement process, and provide the developers more of a framework for actually being able to make rational investment decisions. And I think within the right context of uses can also be something that's very effective and very meaningful for the city.
Well, certainly appreciate all your committee's work on this.
Any other questions? Well, I just want to definitely say thank you. When we first discussed having a think tank, it was, I think we were trying to figure out what that would mean and what that would look like, and that we wanted to have the best people giving us the best work, and then what were we going to do with that? And we definitely got the best people, and they definitely did some amazing work. And I want to thank you guys for all your time, all your thoughtfulness. Tom, the presentation was fantastic, and your words were very, I think, appropriate for where we are right now. And your guidance, you've been a great friend of the city for years and years and years. You helped us with a number of things. You're kind of our go-to. You helped us with the Open Space Task Force, and you always have such a great ability to bring it down to the living level, to the fact that we are all neighbors here. So really thank you guys for everything you've done. We really appreciate it. This is, I think, more than I expected, and we're very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peggy?
Yeah, so I just want to make a couple observations. I've done an awful lot of walking in this city in my 3 campaigns. I've encountered quite a few older citizens. They want to stay where they are, not just in their neighborhood, but in their house. Mm-hmm. And then I've encountered quite a few young people. One of the surprising things was some people who'd been saving for a long time to buy a place in Littleton and could never afford it until we had the recession. And they had money set aside that didn't go belly up. And they were then able to move into the city because they wanted to be here with their children here. And so, you know, some of the stereotypes that people have, I think, are not so accurate. And there are a lot of little babies around that aren't on the radar yet. I mean, there's several in my neighborhood, even though quite a few of us are old. We're not the ones generating them, but there are quite a few young ones. So then a related comment to all of that, instead of necessarily having people move here, move there, whatever, having more transportation opportunities to get them to the restaurants, to get them to the shops if they don't walk. And my husband and I like walking 3 million miles to go places, but not everybody does, and I appreciate that. But if we had more transportation within the city, including getting people to the light rail so they wouldn't be driving and so forth, it seems to me that would make us much more dynamic, get people to the different shopping opportunities, dining, and so forth. So any thoughts on any of that?
I agree completely, but in order to be able to deliver those services, we need to make sure that we have the financial ability to do so.
Yeah, no.
And that's, I think what we're talking about here is not saying we have an issue today. It's that we have an issue with the passing of time that we could otherwise have stopped today.
Yeah.
You know, I was actually thinking about this as I was driving from the airport over here this evening. Am I late when I leave the airport before the meeting starts? Or am I late after the time when I'm supposed to be here? In my way of thinking, when I landed, I let the city manager know that I'm on my way because it's important to know that there's the potential for my being late. I need to manage that now.
Yeah.
The time for me to call and say that I'm late is not 10 minutes after the meeting starts. It's the same thing with economic sustainability. You need to take the steps now to assure that it won't become a problem.
No, and I agree with you on that, absolutely.
And that's by generating this balance, putting ourselves back in balance, generating that additional tax base, what we have is the ability to be able to offer some of the services that you're talking about, which I think are ones that the city should really be talking about, especially as our community continues to age. We need to look at that in the context of how we attract the next generation to make sure that we have, you know, a really intergenerational community, that we've got the reinvestment, that what we've got is a dynamic, diverse community that we've always had.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. So, yeah. Council, I would like us to take some action on this. I think it would be appropriate if we wanted to direct staff to put this on the business agenda the next meeting, or a soon-to-be next meeting, depending on the other items on the agenda. Everybody okay with that?
What are we doing again?
Putting the plan on the general business agenda, or on the regular meeting agenda, so that we can. I think we need to give staff direction and move forward with We've been working on this, like over a year, and I know that I've heard from each of you that you'd like to do what we can do, get this thing moving ahead, and I think we need to give staff direction on. Bruce?
Would that be an opportunity to discuss out maybe some points that we want to amplify on or clarify?
Yep, absolutely. We'll have a full discussion on it. Peggy?
So if we do that, I would love to have footnotes or little parenthetical comments in here of what we already have been doing so that it would show where we're continuing to do some things that more recently we already are doing. It's kind of like a documentation of this step and then continuing to do more, because there's several places really we already, by accident or otherwise, are engaging in some of these things.
Is that simple to fix, Michael? Okay. Okay. You have direction. Thank you. We'll take a 10-minute break. We'll convene at 7:44.
I'm here.
You're not here till you're sitting down.
Oh, I'm not here until I sit down.
Butts and seats.
Yep. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Where is Dana? Oh, she's up there. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So Bill and Dana, our good friends from Civic Canopy, are back and to take a look at our map, our planning map. And I want to just make a brief comment. I had the opportunity to speak to the Optimist group on Friday, and I shared with them, without sharing the visual, but I shared with them what we did, and I talked about the concentric circles and the planning and that type of thing, and the reaction in the room was overwhelming in terms of these guys get up at 7 o'clock. Well, they get up earlier, but it's at 7 o'clock, and I've spoken to them before, and those are early breakfasts at the end of the week, and it's hard to stay real focused on it. But they became very engaged in this and very interested. And the comment that I heard from them is that there was a great deal of appreciation for the levels of planning. So I think that whole concentric or circles that you guys kind of grew from this was absolutely probably exactly where we needed to be. So it's been slightly road tested in the community and so far getting rave reviews. So I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. And on behalf of Dan and I, we're just excited to be back with the Civic Canopy, and we've been, for those watching at home, have been helping out with this visioning process and some conversations alongside of it. And just to kind of frame our presentation, we feel so lucky to have, or to be following what was a really fantastic, nuts and bolts, detailed, kind of hard-hitting economic development presentation, which in many ways kind of it helps you imagine how one might get to a future. And what I think Dan and I would like to kind of present is the summary, first of all, of that vision that you've helped create. We've had a couple turns of the wheel with this with you, and tonight we'd kind of like to put a bow on it. So our first thing is just to revisit that. But if we just stopped there and really didn't talk about the challenge you as civic leaders face in terms of helping that come true, it's not just a matter of having a vision, it's not just a matter of having a plan. There's the reality that once people get involved, nothing is quite simple. And so the second point we want to kind of hit on is a little bit of an insight into how human beings address change. And with apologies in advance for my graphic artist skills, we'll spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and that second point of our chunk would be kind of managing change with a brain and mind, if you will, and understanding how it is that people come to make sense out of change, which is critical for you as civic leaders to keep in mind how it is that people respond to some of the changes you're talking about. And then the third one, we'll get a chance to kind of watch a video of a book that you've all been kind of reading in advance, as I understand that the mayor suggested, of our iceberg is melting. And it's a great allegory for leaders who are helping people stay true to a noble vision in times of change. And we'll actually have some audience participation with that as well. And our hope in that third part of our brief presentation is really to kind of draw from that allegory lessons you might want to keep in mind as leaders, and we'll try to pull those out from you in a discussion, that as you embark on this exciting but often intimidating economic development journey that you've kind of marked out tonight, managing that human side of it, how people come to deal with that change, what will you need to keep in mind as you help people move towards that envisioned future. We'll try to wrap up with some lessons learned and things you might want to kind of keep in mind as you move forward on that journey. So again, vision, managing change with brain and mind, and then kind of charting that journey of change. So I don't know how this overhead camera works, but we wanted to just, again, that first point of returning to your vision.
Magic Man.
Is that Magic Man?
Yeah.
Just wanted to highlight what you all have in front of you.
Let there be light.
Flip it around.
Turn it over.
Down.
Oh, great. All right, there we go.
Imagine if you're standing at the microphone, Bill.
All right, excellent. And I don't know how much it zooms in, but I think
He'll zoom in.
great. I think folks have in front of them, and hopefully those watching from home, just to underscore really this time you're in as a city. Dan and I had the pleasure of the interviews with you, conversations with the community, and I think we picked up in about 2 weeks so quickly what was just on the minds of the citizens of Littleton. It's in your comp plan language. It's in this economic development language. That there's an enormous sense of convergence of the future this community wants together. And as the mayor was talking about, we kind of symbolize that with 3 circles. There's a core to Littleton. It's warm, it's inviting, it's stable, it's strong schools, it's a beautiful environment. It's a core community that people want to be a part of. And this map is not so much an accurate depiction of everything exactly located in the specific space, but it's a symbolic representation of cities across the country would give anything to have the core that Littleton has. But that alone isn't what makes you the city you are. There's also these exciting opportunities of transition. That's that next layer out. There's existing corridors that are already showing signs of the next stage of your development. And so that's symbolized in the great work of Chris Whitman on this map. These opportunities along Broadway, along Santa Fe, along the river, along Littleton Boulevard, along Mineral, where you've got properties that can kind of become this bridge to the future that you're talking about, these mixed development opportunities. And again, some of that's already in transition. And then on the final core on the outside here is this possibility. It's the future that's as of yet unknown. It's what you're helping to create to meet the needs of the future. Some of it's kind of filled in with things that are on the vergence. We actually have, after the Breckenridge Brewery approval a few weeks ago, we were able to add that quickly on the map so that even real-time transitions. But much of that will be uncertain of what will be determined by some of your leadership on the kind of, again, conceptual horizons of Littleton's growth. And so we hope that in kind of putting it all on one page, summarizing the conversation, the detailed plans, you can look at this and say, there's a solid core in Littleton, there's opportunities for immediate transition, and then there's possibilities in the future that are as of yet unidentified. And it's, in many ways, your job to, as civic leaders, to kind of help identify those. We do have a document that we passed out. Hopefully everybody got a copy of it. It's kind of an artist's statement explaining the map. And I don't know if there's anything I've left off from that. Let me turn to my colleague, Dana Bryson, if there's anything I left off wanted to add.
Hello. Good evening. No, I think you did a good job. And folks, you can see it's just a description of what's on the map and the process, which was a pretty short 2 individual meetings and then 1 to 1.5 group meetings with the council to get to this. I just wanted to underscore one piece that I was reminded of as I listened to the economic development presentation, which is that there are so many different streams converging here on Littleton at the same time with your processes that you've invested 18 months, 2 years with the comp plan update, more than 2 years in reaching consensus about. And right now you have, as you all know, the Inspire Littleton results, the citizen survey, the business survey, the comp plan update, the corridor plans. Now you have your think tank or your economic development plan. And you have this vision, and now is the time where you all get to act. You don't need to do any more work to figure out if you agree on where you want to go because you're there. And that's exciting. And if I could just take, personal privilege of saying, this is an elected body who is incredibly respectful to each other. And it really stands out to me as someone who's worked with many elected bodies around the country. You all respect each other. It's a tenet of leadership, as your mayor gave you the book Courage to read, I think, for homework. And that respect for each other is really what Lee says is the underpin, the hallmark of real courage in leadership. And you all have that as a body. So I'm excited for what lies ahead, and thank you for this opportunity. And hope you enjoy this map, and I know you will use it, and now's the time for action. So thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
That's the closure of the first point. I don't know, offer a space if there's any comments from the council or questions for us.
One of the things that occurred to me when I was looking at the map was, because we're dealing with our budget also, and we definitely were, are dealing with a budget that has extreme demands on it, and we, over the past 5-6 years, we haven't seen the revenue numbers that, of course, you'd like to when you're going through that type of economic downturn. But one of the things that was, I think, resonated for me is that you hear continuously in communities that are well-loved how people just don't want them to change. They moved here for a certain set of reasons, and those reasons still exist, and they don't want to see those change, because then that changes the spirit for them, and you make those decisions. I've lived in a number of different places and in a number of different neighborhoods and houses, not in Littleton, that I was praying for the neighborhood to change. And when it didn't change, I moved. And in Littleton, that doesn't happen. They don't want it to change, and they're not moving. And we honor that. We're living it. When a council member moves, Bruce, he moves, what, five blocks over or so.
Same circle.
Exactly. But the balance between what we have, which is the center part, and protecting and preserving and being able to keep a library and keep a museum and keep a quaint downtown without putting a Kentucky Fried Chicken on a corner, that part is that center part that is the soul, and that's why we're here, and that's why we stay. But it is this outside area where the change can occur, which is, without that change occurring, we can't continue to support the center. It's just financially not feasible without support from this outside area. It was very clear in the budget session. It's going to be very clear again in September when we hear it again. So I think this represents, for me, a number of layers of policy for us. Not only what should we do, where should we do it, how should we do it, when should we do it, why should we do it, and how are all these things how does, a move bump someone else and cause a reaction. So don't worry about it. Were you hearing that? So for me, it's as we keep going through this process, it's starting to take on more meaning. Anybody else? Okay, go ahead.
Great. So we, as Dana said, we celebrate and congratulate you on that clarity of vision. Again, it's been consistently reinforced in all of these different things. So it's not as if that just gets put aside now and the hard work begins. That always will stay on that horizon to shoot for. But now begins the difficult task. You have clarity of vision, and then there's the work to do. And as the plans that you've been talking about tonight and in the meetings that we've seen, the comp plan being updated, it isn't as if that unity of vision automatically translates into unity of action. You know this better than we do. The very act of needing to adapt and change and face the challenges you face is something that causes stress and strain and can cause conflict. And oftentimes that conflict and tension and friction can drive a community apart even as it tries to achieve a shared vision. And that paradox, in many ways, is the challenge of leadership. How does one maintain a sense of center, a sense of peace of mind, a sense of engagement with those that might be angry or threatened by the changes you're potentially talking about? How is it, as a civic leader, that you stay centered and remember those things? And one of the, I think we found in our work with organizations and communities and states that are undergoing changes, how little we actually know about how the human being is wired to adapt. So again, with permission to just give kind of a brief intro into this fascinating world of neuro-leadership, if you will, literally looking into our brains for a minute to find out why it is that when we talk about adaptation, change, dealing with challenges, we find ourselves in the same kind of patterns all the time. So, and I do apologize for those who are sitting on this side of the room. You're welcome to join us down front where you can see, or it will be a very short drawing and I will turn it around and share with you. I tried to go low tech rather than doing the
folks,
PowerPoint.
if you want to come on down.
But we encourage you
Come
to
on around.
join the conversation for the second part, too.
And Bill, while you're working on that, I want to just thank very much the Board and Commission members that came this evening. I see a number of you guys out there. And if you're a Board and Commission member, will you raise your hand, please?
Great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Hope you're enjoying.
Looks like Mark Rudnicki left, huh? Okay.
Just call them out.
Wanted to
call
make a
them out.
specific note of that, Jerry?
I think you
Could be
did.
watching from home,
Good. So the reason this is important, hopefully it will become self-evident, is that it makes a very big difference when we engage with each other on divisive issues, potentially challenging issues, when we understand what motivates the responses from those we're engaging with. And the hope in this brief piece of the conversation is to kind of normalize, if you will, why it is that people may get set on edge or find each other at odds on issues that, even though we agree on the future you might want to hold, we can disagree pretty significantly about the pathway to get there. And that the more normal we take that as, and the more strategies we have to kind of take a deep breath, lock arms, remember that we can still stay connected, the more likely you are to get through that challenging time successfully on the other side.
Actually, going back to the book, there will be folks that want to hold on without change.
Yes, well, and we'll explain why that might be, and kind of the understandability of that. So as this research in the last 10 or 15 years has kind of emerged on how it is our brain function, I know it's familiar to most people. Our ability now to peer into the human brain as we're making decisions, as we're responding situations, has never been what it is now. We can conduct these experiments under MRI situations and know exactly what parts of the brain are firing when we do specific things. It's truly unbelievable what's possible now. And almost all of it is focusing on this front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. Now, again, this is not a long science lecture, but I will give this is the smallest part of our brain in terms of, overall evolution. It's the most recent to develop. And it is where almost all of the rational activity we come to know in decision-making takes place. It's a very finicky little portion of the brain. It uses an enormous amount of our energy. And it is so quickly tipped over and kind of overwhelmed when we're under situations of stress and anxiety. But it's what gives people the ability to kind of listen to a discussion, to manage and self-regulate in times when there's differences. And so the smallest portion of our brain that we most need when we're deciding things like economic development and complicated plans of reinvestment is often the part of our brains we have no access to anymore when we're in those conversations. You may experience this on a regular basis, how quickly the temperature can rise in a discussion where people are at odds. And so I wanted to kind of give a little bit of an insight of why it is the energy that we most need to kind of engage in thoughtful, sustained planning and kind of self-regulation is no longer at our disposal when we most need it. And that's because our brain is designed to do basically scan our environment constantly for two things: threats and rewards. We are constantly searching the environment around us, what's threatening and what's rewarding. We draw towards things that promise some type of reward, and we resist or retreat or feel threatened and remove ourselves from those that promise some type of threat. All right, that's not new. We know that language of fight or flight. We've heard that language since we were kids. Here's what's extraordinary. When they do studies, again, on the way the human brain works, the very same parts of the brain that fire when you put your hand on a hot plate, that tells your brain you're under physical pain, are the parts of your brain that's firing when you are excluded from social situations, when you are left out of a group, even an online chat, when they can conduct experiments. So in other words, our brains don't know the difference between physical threat and social threat. We are constantly scanning the environment and responding to threats in that environment. And at a ratio of about 5-to-1, we are 5 times more sensitive to threats than we are drawn to rewards. Now you may ask, why are we having a lecture on brain structure? How does this translate? Well, that would be overwhelming if, as civic leaders, you had to try to imagine all of the possible threats someone might be experiencing and to manage those. It would be overwhelming. But there's an acronym and a kind of a model that a gentleman named David Rock and others have picked up that it's called the SCARF model, which I'll briefly walk through, which in service of the decisions that you make as civic leaders might be of tremendous value. And here's what it stands for. The S in SCARF stands for status. So when our brains are scanning the environment, we are on a threat or reward continuum as it relates to status. So you know this when you walk into a room. You pick up cues. Who's in charge? Who's got the power? Who's at an elevated position? Who's at a diminished position? As teachers in a classroom, always being very sensitive to when someone makes a joke that might kind of put another kid down, you can just see their brains begin to shut off if someone has been lowered in their status. And similarly, when someone is raised in status, literally the parts of their brain that fire that reward message, that are endorphins being released, of the pleasurable experience of being given high status, when someone gets recognition, when someone gets an award, when someone's hard work is acknowledged, our brains know and seek out that reward. So the cues in an environment around status are critical. We're hardwired to pay attention to status. And when you think about the way our culture is designed, just about everything sends messages of wanting to raise people's status. You travel in an airport, everything's about getting premier status. Everything's about having access to something that is of limited resource. So status is the S in SCARF. The C in SCARF is certainty. It's the second cue our brains pick up on. And again, whether we're moving towards threat or reward depends on what those cues are. So the minute our brains sense a lack of certainty in an environment, same patterns exist. Those parts of our brains that fire under physical pain start to fire. When someone is, if they're being laid off at a job or they've experienced some sudden abrupt change of what they were expecting, run a brain scan, all of the energy is going into that protective area to kind of resist that threat that they're experiencing. So if you're having a conversation with someone who's just suddenly abruptly learned an unsettling and kind of destabilizing fact, there's a good chance that the energy that they need to engage with you in a conversation is now going to the protective parts. It's kind of in that fight or flight parts of their brain. They may not have access to the parts to be able to deal with that situation rationally. Conversely, if you can provide a sense of stability in an environment, in even difficult times, to be able to kind of calm people down, draw a box around it and say, we're going through tough times, here's what we do know. Here's something we can hold on to. Again, watching the brain scans, people's elevated sense of calm and peace returns. Quick story on that. My first outward bound trip when I was a young teacher, I'm up on a rock face with a group of folks who had never been in the wilderness, and it starts to lightning and hail. People are terrified, highly uncertain. I mean, if we had done brain scans of everyone in that room, there would have been an extremely elevated threat state. What the outward bound instructor did, he didn't stop the lightning. He didn't stop the. What he did is he circles us up. He said, "All right, listen carefully. We're going to be okay. This is a dangerous situation. We're going to get back in our tents. We're going to put some hot water on. You're going to get in your sleeping bag, and we're going to be fine. Got it? Let's go." That group of people was able to kind of say, "Okay, he knows what he's doing. We're going to be okay. Sleeping bag. Put some hot water on. We're going to be okay." And just kind of kept repeating that mantra. So even in a heightened brain state of uncertainty, the leadership he provided was able to kind of mark out and say, here's what we do know, and let's do what we can do in this uncertain time. Enormous impact on the effectiveness of that group. So S in SCARF is for status. The C is for certainty. The A is for autonomy in this model. Amazing amount of research about how much human beings value autonomy. It's almost one of the, even beyond changes in our pay, even beyond other types of rewards, give people control over their own destiny. Let them make their own decisions and influence the outcomes that they care about. Brain state goes up, sense of reward goes up, performance goes up, overall happiness goes up. It's an incredibly important resource for human beings. Again, take people's control over their own decisions away, jeopardize their sense of being able to have an influence over their own outcomes. All the energy goes into that protective, resistant parts of our brain. Again, you've probably seen this when choices that you have to make limit the choices and freedoms that other people have. Oftentimes that will get a sense of resistance and fear, literally, that just comes in unavoidably the way we're hardwired. People need a sense of autonomy and control over their own decisions and their livelihoods. R is for relatedness. This is a fascinating aspect of the way our brains work. When we walk into a room, we quickly pick up what's the in-group and what's the out-group. Is that person talking to me part of my team or not? And from the time we're babies, it's one of our first cues. Can I trust this person? As we learn to recognize facial recognition, how quickly babies determine whether or not this is an in person or an out person, someone who's safe or not. And over, as we grow up, we get those patterns that get reinforced. The funny thing is though, those are not fixed identities. You can take a group of people randomly associated and divide them in half and give all of that group, one half of them, the same color shirt. And suddenly their brain states will change and begin to identify as an in-group. It isn't a hardwired thing. It's not a determined thing. But when you watch people's brains, that need to know, can I trust you? Are you safe? Are we in together on the same team? Is, again, all of the same neural pathways start firing in the same way. So as we apply this to some of the situations you face, what are the cues people are receiving about being a part of the team that's working on something? Are they in on the sense of connection, the sense of inclusion of what's going on? Or are they being left outside? And whether you're a 3-year-old or a 30-year-old or an 80-year-old, as much as we might try to pretend that we've outgrown the need to be on the group, we are hardwired to identify that as a critical cue of our own safety. And so our brains will never stop picking that up. And the last one, the F, is for fairness. We cannot stop watching whether or not something is fair. You know, again, from when we come out of the womb to when we're in adolescence trying to figure things out, we want to make sure that the rules of the game are not slighted against us. And when we pick up those cues that some process was not itself fair, we will begin to immediately resist the outcomes of that process. The research, as part of my dissertation, it was studying what are the effects of high-quality process. This is one of the most important determinants of whether or not a group of people will end up supporting a group's decision, is whether or not they believe the process that led to the decision was truly fair. And if they don't, they will work against that outcome. Again, chances are good in your positions you've had to deal with that, figuring out, well, that's not just because people are nitpicky. That's not because they might have had a bad day. That's not because they're unreasonable. Our brains are wired to pay attention to that stuff and to move in when things are taken care of and when they appear to be fair, because we can trust them, our lives might depend on it, and to move away and resist when they don't. So, again, SCARF is the acronym: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Our brains scan the universe all the time paying attention to these cues. Think about your role as, just when you walk in the room as a city council member, what you do to this equation for everybody you interact with, whether you know them or not, whether they like you or not, just all things being equal. Where do you stand vis-a-vis citizens of Littleton just on the cues of status? What do you set in motion? If someone were to walk into this room and they hadn't heard anything we were talking about and just ask, who's got higher status in the room?
I think sometimes they put you up on that pedestal that you wish you weren't on.
Exactly. So, and again, whether they want to or not, or whether you want them to or not, by design, you set off cues that you have higher status in that relationship. There's all sorts of things you can do to mitigate that. How do you work against it? But from the get-go, you face the possibility of engendering fears in the very people you want to work with just based on those status cues. Chances are good people even aren't aware of that. But that's something that can awesome. Certainty. Much of what you do is talking about the changes that need to be made, making decisions that will affect people in different ways. So your very jobs are likely to kind of tee up issues of certainty and potential fears that people might have about their needs for certainty. Autonomy. By your nature of your jobs, you may be curtailing the limits and possibilities that people have. Some of the decisions you make are designed, obviously, to promote people's autonomy and to help them. But there's a decent chance that the decisions you make may have to have some effect of limiting certain groups' choices vis-a-vis other groups, by definition of some of the change we're doing to achieve this vision. Relatedness. Oftentimes, as civic leaders, you walk into a room and deal with people that are on multiple teams. You can't be on any of their teams as you make decisions initially. So they're paying attention to, are you on my team? Are you on my side? And you have to keep that kind of distance. It's a difficult challenge to face. And then fairness. How is it that as you make tough decisions, people come to trust that they were done in a fair way? I think our practice in society is very skeptical of government's decisions by nature. We're untrusting. Something might be going on that we weren't a part of. And again, that's not because people are mean-spirited. We're hardwired to be nervous about those things. And the kind of power that gets executed in public office is by definition heightening that. And so the deck is often stacked against your...
And Bill, I want to be loved.
and I think you are. So now, I say that not to depress you or say anything you don't know, but it just means that if you've got the deck stacked against you and you're trying to lead a group of people to a common vision, if you're able to kind of pay attention to the ways in which you can trigger that reward state, where you can send cues that people can be rewarded for these things and not just threatened, how is it that you can elevate the role of Littleton citizens in this work? Creating the kinds of bodies like you've done tonight with the Economic Development Think Tank is a great way to elevate the voice of citizens to make sure it's heard more louder and clearly. Providing certainty. Tell people what you do know, what is known. Being really clear about the kind of steps that are going to be taken. Again, back to my Outward Bound instructor. He didn't change the weather. He didn't change the fact that sales tax may be declining over time. But you can provide that sense of certainty that we've got a plan and we're addressing it. Autonomy. Giving people reasonable choices within limited boundaries. We all learn this as parents. How do we let young children make choices within acceptable boundaries? Marking out territory that where certain economic opportunities can happen. Ways that you can send cues that kind of promote people's autonomy. Relatedness, building coalitions, engaging people in the process, letting them know that you're on their team, that this is a broad group that's moving forward towards this vision, sending cues that they're in on the conversation and it's a part of their conversation. And fairness, above all, critiquing the process, being open and transparent with how decisions get made, giving people feedback loops. So the hope is that as we talk about this next stage of how you'll manage this change process going to a shared vision, knowing a little bit that people are largely more innocent than we might give them credit for in why they respond they do. That's how our brains are structured. We're just doing what made it possible to survive as human beings, and then being savvy about how we manage the very cues that kind of set those things off can be a huge, huge advantage. So let me pause there. That's the end of the biology leadership lecture. And see questions or feedback on that. See what of it, if any of it resonates, and how you might use some of those steps. I wasn't sure if you were on the verge of something there, Councilman Cernanek.
It's always on the verge. Thank you, Jerry. The part that many of us know, and we probably have our own life experiences on HA, is, and it's probably more evident when we enter the room with staff than when we enter the room with citizens, is that the chemistry of the room changes with our presence. As much as we would just like to be a fly on the wall and observe, if we are observed, it's changed.
Yeah. That's a great point. And through no fault of our own, and often through no fault of the people observing you. It's the way our brains are structured. Any other thoughts or comments? Ways it might be useful for you? Yep, Councilman.
It's an interesting, it is sort of paradoxical. I mean, I think most people seek to serve on council because the motivation is to do something positive for the community, to, do the job, represent the citizens, and what you're describing is it's a funny thing that an entity like a council gets created because the community needs that element of participation in terms of the decision-making process, and people try to do it for the right reasons, and then it's distrusted physiologically as a result of what you just described. So that's an interesting.
That's a great. We've set up a structure that is potentially in opposition to the way our brains are structured for peace of mind. It's a great point. It's a great point. And the hope in sharing it with you is that if we want folks using their prefrontal cortex to reason and think and regulate and reach agreements, we have to make sure that they're in a state where that's where the energy is flowing in their brains, quite literally. And even just as simple as paying attention as we structure our meetings, as we structure our processes, how might we set off cues of status? How might we raise people's anxiety about certainty? How might we promote people's autonomy, a sense of ownership over their own choices? How might we increase their sense of relatedness? Connecting with people to start a meeting. Those might be tools that are useful in the difficult job you have of charting a course to the vision that, again, people have said over and over they want to have. They just may be nervous about how that happens. So, all right. So with that in mind...
Silence is golden from us. Keep going.
Well, so we wanted to lay just that foundation, and then we'll go to the third. Anything I missed there, Dana? Anything to all right, so the third part that we wanted to cover gets the audience participation in the kind of multimedia presentation. And this, we really owe all this segue into Mayor Brinkman's suggestion. As fun as it is to talk about a shared vision, what we also heard unequivocally from Tom Wooten tonight is there's a challenge to get there. You simply can't continue to chart the course you've charted and hope that you'll arrive there. There are threats to your economic base in terms of sales tax revenue. That balance of the housing, economics, and job creation is a challenge. Decisions will have to be made, and this is difficult terrain. But fear not. We can learn a lot from other communities that have gone through this, and a certain community in the Arctic regions of the globe has great lessons for us. So we're going to queue up a video, and if Mike is getting that ready, of our iceberg is melting. And it's an allegory that the council has had a chance to read the book. For those of you watching in the audience, the brief overview is how a community of penguins addresses the challenge of an iceberg that is melting. And yes, we are serious. This is not a joke. But this fable has a lot embedded in it. And for those of you who read the book, it's a good summary of it. We'll let it run. It's about an 8-minute clip, and then we'll take some time, kind of turn to your neighbor. But I'd invite you to pay attention to the story of this little iceberg community. And the lessons that might be drawn as a community of Littleton, and certainly for council members, of what you take away as critical to keep in mind as you chart your course to this shared vision, knowing the threats that you have, that you face, knowing the shared vision you do enjoy here in the city, and what stands out from this that will kind of help guide your journey. So pay attention to those things as we watch this short clip together. And I guess cue the tape, and I will now drop this down so people can see it. No tape inside, please.
He's getting it.
All right. And actually, Mayor, while we're waiting for that, I don't know if there's any other ways you wanted to tee up this discussion before while we're.
Well, I would just, part of the context of this, too, was a seminar that I had gone to, National League of Cities, where the person giving the seminar is a retired Marine and had started, after he retired from being a Marine, he decided to move to South Dakota. He had some family members there, so he went up to South Dakota, and he became instantly bored. So he ran for office, and he served on the council for a while, and he served as a mayor for a while. And they ended up, during his tenure there, had a severe flood, and it killed hundreds of people. It destroyed much of the town, millions and millions and millions of dollars. And the community was very much in angst about what do we do now? How do we rebuild? Everybody kind of had different ideas, and a lot of people were scared and panicked and they didn't know what to do, and a lot of other people were wanting to jump into leadership roles and control. And so they ended up solving their problem, and actually in a very, very, very creative way. But he ran across this book at the time that I think they were either at the end of going through it, and he actually felt as though it might have been written for him because the way that the story unfolds. And what they ended up doing in this particular town was they agreed to tax themselves in order to rebuild their community. And so half of the tax went to what was a citizens project list. And the citizens came up with, well, we want an event center, and we want our school playgrounds better, and we want, so, and then the other half went to infrastructure and repairs and needs that had to happen there. And there was an awful lot of back and forth and an awful lot of meetings and collaboration, cooperation, so that at the end everybody walked away with at least a consensus of this is the right thing to do. And they literally rebuilt that community 10 times better than it was when the flood hit. And they've got amenities and event centers and increased their ice hockey and all of this stuff, meanwhile maintaining highly functioning roads and lighting, street lighting, et cetera, all of those things that every city wants to have. You want to have all your really great infrastructure, and you want to have all these great activity, fun places to go to, too. So it was an opportunity for that entire community to go through a massive, massive change that they did not expect or could not have prepared for, and how they came through that with ease and grace. And so we are not anywhere near that level of concern, but this is, as he was talking through it, I thought, it's just so, for any city that is coming out of this recession, and any city that has very little opportunity to completely build a mall. Of course, nobody builds malls anymore because malls fail, but it was just, I thought it was something that would be fascinating for the council, and really not as though it has one core message for us, but that it has many, many messages, and each of us on our own different levels. And I think, one of the interesting things is that in the back, Heidi King, who apparently was or is in the Department of Defense, ordered one for every single person in her department, over 500 people. So I don't think it is exclusive.
That caught my eye, too. That was paid for by the taxpayers, by the way, while all the private businesses did not do that.
Okay. But I think that, it crosses a lot of boundaries as to, a lot of different socioeconomic and sociology or sociographic needs or learnings. So I think that's enough. Enough of me.
And again, just last comment we'll make. When you see an exciting report at least I found the think tank's presentation, I mean, this is a journey that won't just happen by itself. It will require people to listen to each other, to manage stress and conflict. It won't be without challenge. And so looking at a more simple allegory for a role in your position we thought might be useful. So, yes.
Yeah,
Councilman Cole.
I mean, Littleton didn't have the flood. I mean, we talked about there. It had, though, the historic flood in the 60s, so we might call it the mud pit and so forth. I mean, not we, but the city had something that people emerged and they did something not so challenging because it wasn't as devastating, although it was in a sense. So we have some history here of people coming together and leaders stepping forth and...
Absolutely. And there'll be challenges ahead. I mean, the crisis is an opportunity in that kind of now cliched phrase. But so let's take a lesson from our friends at Penguins, and we'll come back and talk a little bit about what we see. Roll it, Mike.
This is a story about a flock of penguins who live on an iceberg in Antarctica, the South Pole. They are like a big family. They have been living as a colony on this iceberg for years.
Can you please
as
turn it
far
up a
back
little
as
bit?
They can remember.
Thank you.
It is their home. They don't know it yet, but change is coming for them. In order to survive, they will need to learn the change leadership process, one step at a time. When they aren't hunting for creatures in the sea, they spend most of their time with friends and relatives. Except this one, Fred. Fred is unusually curious and observant. He watches the sea and stuffs his observations, ideas, and conclusions in a briefcase. One day, Fred learned something alarming.
Oh boy, I have to do something. I gotta tell Alice.
This is Alice. She is one of the Penguins' Leadership Council members. She is tough and has a reputation of getting things done.
Alice, can I speak with you for a moment? I believe that our iceberg is melting.
Really? Well, show me what you mean.
So Fred took Alice to the heart of the iceberg.
See, Alice? Our iceberg has cracks that lead to larger caves. If the ice melts sufficiently, water will pour into these cracks and caves. If we have a cold winter, the water in these cracks can freeze quickly, trapping water inside the caves. Then, as the temperature goes lower, the water in the caves will freeze too. This freezing liquid will expand in volume, causing our iceberg to break into pieces. This could destroy our home and place us all in great danger.
This is not good. We must bring this information to the Leadership Council.
I'll prepare a presentation to convince them that something must be done.
The Leadership Council consists of Lewis, the head of the council, Alice, Buddy, the handsome, charismatic one, and Nono, a cranky penguin who is responsible for weather forecasts.
Causing our iceberg to break into pieces.
This is wild speculation and fear-mongering. Our iceberg can withstand such fluctuations. Can he guarantee his data and conclusions are 100% correct?
I can't. But if our iceberg breaks into pieces in winter, wouldn't many of us die?
Imagine parents who lost their children coming to us and asking, "Why didn't you foresee this crisis? It was your job to protect the colony." What would you tell them?
If Fred is correct, we only have 2 months until winter to react to this threat.
We must inform everyone. This calls for a general assembly of the colony.
No! It would be very bad to worry them.
We don't want to panic anyone.
We must keep this a secret.
I have an idea. Would you give me a few minutes, please?
Fred went quickly down the mountain and arrived minutes later with a glass bottle.
Let's fill this bottle with water, seal it, and leave it in the ice overnight. Then tomorrow we can see if it's broken by the force of expanding water as it freezes. If I am correct, the bottle will be broken.
Let's do it. We'll meet here tomorrow morning.
The next morning they found the bottle broken.
Oh. I'm convinced. We have to do something about this.
Let us call a General Assembly of the colony.
And with that, the Penguins started the change leadership process with step 1, establishing a sense of urgency.
Clearly, our iceberg is in danger, but I am confident we will find a solution. We need to act quickly.
The next step was step 2, creating the guiding coalition. A diverse team of 5 penguins was given the task of finding a solution. Louis, Alice, Fred, Buddy, and Professor, who was the smartest penguin in the colony. Each had different strengths, and together they were the best team for the job. Their task was step 3 of the change leadership process, developing a change vision.
I've got an idea. Let's move to the center of Antarctica, where ice is thicker and stronger.
We will be too far from the water. How will we get fish?
What about using superglue to hold the iceberg together?
That's very funny.
Look, up there, the seagull. It can't fly forever. It must have a home somewhere.
It could be very lost, but it doesn't seem to be afraid. What if moving from one place to another is just the way it lives?
Like a nomad.
I can almost see how we might live. We'd learn to move around. We wouldn't try to fix melting icebergs. We would just face up to the fact that what sustains us can't go on forever.
Our founder had this same idea when he moved our colony to this iceberg years ago. This sounds like our best shot. Let's inform the others.
The next step was number 4, communicating the vision for buy-in. Louis called a general assembly again to tell all of the new strategy. Since Buddy was the best storyteller, he was chosen to tell the story of the seagull. Then Louis addressed the crowd.
We are not chained to this piece of ice. Let it melt and break. We will find other places to live that are safer.
Although many penguins were relieved to hear this, many were still skeptical. So Alice came up with the idea of putting slogans on ice posters to win over the support of the colony. They worked hard to communicate the new vision of a nomadic life. Then they moved the plan forward with step 5, empowering broad-based action.
A scout team should go and look for another iceberg. Assemble a team and get ready.
Yes, sir.
Of course, it didn't go smoothly at first. Arguments broke out among the scouts, but Louis dealt with them in a straight and direct way, keeping the focus on the main task. Then Nono started forecasting storms to discourage the scouts and lower morale. Louis told Nono that his forecasting services are not needed at this time. Many of the penguins, particularly the young ones, were scared about the upcoming move. Buddy asked the teachers of the colony to speak about bravery to these young penguins. He inspired them to come up with Tribute to Our Heroes Day for when the scouts return. Next, they needed to act and make some progress. This is step 6, generating short-term wins. The strong, bright, and highly enthusiastic scouts jumped into the water and searched for a new iceberg that would be good enough for them to move to.
My life was boring.
Scouting is fun!
I will do this for the colony!
My family will be so proud of me!
When the brave scouts finally returned, they were tired and hungry, but they were greeted with a hero's welcome. They were given medals and food. They told amazing tales about the sea, about swimming long distances, and about new icebergs they had seen. As happy as everyone was to have this successful trip completed, it was no time to rest. They pressed onward with step number 7, never letting up. The next day, a second group of scouts went out and found the best iceberg for their new home.
This iceberg has everything we need. A tall snow wall and good fishing sites. During the migration, our young and old can rest along the way on small icebergs.
Let's waste no time. Start the migration before winter hits.
The colony moved to the new home. The move was chaotic at times, but with Louis's leadership and Buddy's encouragement, they arrived safely on the new iceberg. However, they still needed to take one last step. Number 8, incorporating changes into the culture. Although the new iceberg was solid and safe, they decided to move again the year after to an even better iceberg. They learned that to survive, constant change must become part of their culture. We can all learn something from the fable of these penguins. Is your organization safe? Are you sure that your iceberg is not melting? Here is a review of the change leadership process that the penguins used. Step 1, establishing a sense of urgency. Step 2, creating the guiding coalition. Step 3, developing a change vision. Step 4, communicating the vision for buy-in. Step 5, empowering broad-based action. Step 6, generating short-term wins. Step 7, never letting up. And Step 8, incorporating changes into the culture. Think about these steps and how they work for our clever penguins. They can help you embrace change and keep you ahead of your melting iceberg.
All right, let's hear it for the penguins. All right, and I would ask this of folks in the audience too. Sometimes it's helpful just after seeing something like that, just to turn to the person next to you for 2 or 3 minutes and just talk about what struck you, what seemed to be relevant or useful from that for our conversation. Again, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but there's actually a lot that can be drawn for it. So whether you're on the council or in the audience, turn to the person next to you, 2 or 3 minutes. What struck you from that video?
The book was a lot better. It's tough to,
When they make the movie.
yeah, distill it into a movie. I guess takeaways.
Trying to figure out how we
I know, that's what I kept trying to think.
When you just take first priority and how would it be just to get it going. Like I tell my clients, because they just keep walking past the same stuff. So you don't even see it anymore. But if you but I thought that one choose me.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, what are the environmental cues, not, yeah, figurative, what are out there, what's out there that,
Yeah, that's something else I want to see.
and how do you interpret it in relationship to what we're doing? I think the process stuff they gave is sort of mechanical.
Yeah, that's something else we know about.
Here's things that would make a change
All right, so maybe we'll call you back as a whole group here and
in the first place.
just take a few minutes here. We know with snow falling late at night, but it seems like a critical juncture, especially upon the delivery of this plan that offers kind of a bridge to the future of that vision that you've been working on. Just taking the time to kind of learn some leadership lessons from the allegory, and maybe we'll try to apply them to some of the steps that might be implied by this economic development plan. But first of all, just what stood out, or again, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but there's a lot of lessons to take away from it.
So a little unfair advantage in this, which is had the opportunity of the book and also using this as a transformational consultant. So be careful.
That's okay. You're the that student that sits in the front of the class.
Don't want to be recognized like that. No. Remember over here? I'm the one sitting in the last row. So okay, but a full, almost a third of the book, and a big step is step number one, which is the sense of urgency, and not that you're looking to create panic, but there was a real development of that in this, which is you had Fred, who was sitting out there, and he says, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. And he goes to Alice. Alice plays a very good Doubting Thomas. It's even emphasized more in the book, which is don't tell me, show me. So she had to get to the point where she could say, this isn't good, and that was pretty fair. And then going to the Leadership Council, and Leadership Council, Lewis, top hat guy, was basically there saying, you know, being fair to the whole group, you know, give us some idea of certainty that there is an urgency that was there, and all of that's occurring even before they're going to a larger group. And so there's a stepwise process that occurred that was not just saying it's an issue, but sometimes the challenge is developing that urgency. Very much it was covered in the book. Fred had to come up with a creative way, hence the bottle, to show that there was some certainty involved in what he was claiming is an urgency.
That's a great point. So draw that analogy. What do you have at your disposal to build that sense of urgency? What have you found yourself using? What do you think, knowing what you know about the economic forecasts, the situation that Littleton's in, how do you build that sense of urgency in the community? And to your point earlier, Councilwoman Cole, you might already be doing this. I mean, to imply that this would only begin after reading this book. You might already be building that sense of urgency. But what do you draw upon to help build that?
I think in some ways what they did, just the facts. You can't run around and say that the budget is that, you know, or that we're running out of money. I mean, none of that is true, but you can't create a panic with just because you want to, or just because you want to change something.
Right.
There has to be the facts to back it up. And the council, I like what Phil was saying, I like that there was a great deal of doubt until it was proven, because if the seven of us just sat up here and if one person said something and we all started head nodding, we wouldn't be doing our jobs. It is about each of us proving to ourselves, maybe through a collective means like these guys went together to see the problem, but not just taking someone's word for it.
A great point. It's create a sense of urgency, not create a sense of panic. That's a great distinction.
Well, as the book more, I think, than this talks about, you have to get the emotional connection to the problem. But they're on an iceberg, and they don't have all the media exposure that we do. So I see, I'm putting in another problem here, complicate it more. As we would try to create this emotional urgency with our citizens, we may discourage people from wanting to invest in Littleton. So we have to think about this in a way that we have to figure out what the darn problem is, and it's a complex one, as I see it. But we have already been trying to help make people aware of it. But if we go out and take pictures of all our potholes and places where code enforcement is needing some ramping up, and businesses have some shopping areas have lots of vacant spaces, it's like we say, don't come here. And if you live here, hey, move someplace else. So this is a real challenge.
That's a great point to point out.
I think also watching the 8-minute video doesn't have near the information as 135 pages, whatever this thing is. So I think the council makes the decisions based on information that we have. The goal or challenge for us is to convey that information.
Great point.
And that's true. And it just dawned on me as watching that. The book is far better than the movie. And
I generally think
the movie
that's
just
true.
doesn't contain all the details that make it really a good story.
That's a great point. Yeah, Councilman.
And maybe another way to say another way to describe what Peggy's talking about, which I think is right, is our doing our job. If we're doing our job well, we're minimizing the impact of negative issues with respect to the citizens, which could theoretically mask a longer-term issue. So during the recession, your revenues go down, you defer maintenance. So maybe we're not doing as much on, on road repairs or whatnot over some period of time. And that's appropriate management of a challenging situation, but it creates issues down the road, which Tom Wooten, pretty much, he identified the issue of reinvestment in the community and so forth and so on, and a lot of what he talked about was going down the path of trying to identify that sense of urgency, which sort of by the nature of what we've tried to do over the past X number of years is to keep people from, not keep them from sensing urgency, but solve the problems to the best of our ability in the short run to make sure things keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So, again, there's a lot of dichotomy there.
It really is. I think you've hit on such an important point, Councilman Cole. I think of this point as what many people have come to understand from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, is the Stockdale paradox, is that you have to confront the brutal facts. This is after Admiral Stockdale, the great leader in Vietnam, who was in Hilton, Hanoi for, I think, 4 years?
5 years.
5 years. Yeah. And as he came to tell his story, he talks about the Stockdale paradox. He never once doubted he would lose, even as he confronted the brutal facts that he is surrounding him. Either one without the other. If we try to sugarcoat what's true for fear that people will be concerned, we don't do them any service. If we overblow and lose faith that you'll move forward, you don't survive. So keeping that paradox in mind, never losing sight on the vision that you have, even as you confront the brutal facts of the reality, is what it takes to lead in these times of change. So I think it's a key insight. Other things you took away or that seem relevant for you, Mayor?
Well, part of what, along with what Peggy was saying too, what they did in the book was that they did share information, but they didn't begin to share information and recruit help until they had a solution, until they had what they needed. They had their evidence, but they also had a solution. So they weren't just throwing this problem out to the community. They were, and they were asking for the community buy-in on it too. And I think from the very beginning they recognized that. I mean, and the book does elaborate a lot more on that whole effort. That was pretty extensive little effort, and then getting the scouts to do, and then how they all supported the scouts because they couldn't eat while they were busy working, and so they went and got food for them, and they brought in every part of the community to help. And I think that was when you do have something, be it a budget or you're melting iceberg, it is about what you've kind of wraps back up to some of that, particularly that autonomy, relatedness, and fairness.
That's so if you've just pulled the certainty rug out from someone and saying, our economic future is uncertain, increase the autonomy, and we need your help, participate in the solution. It's a critical move to mitigate that fear kind of cascading down. Yeah.
So in the book, which is again much better than the movie,
we're selling copies in the lobby.
A big part of the appeal was for the young, for the survival of the young. And again, in Littleton, over the years, that has been a key thing. So every time the school board has asked for a mill levy increase, the community has stepped forward and supported it because of the young, the future of the young. So very much important to do what I think we already are trying to do in some ways, not just through the schools, but in other ways engaging the youth, trying to help them see their connectedness, trying to help their parents, grandparents, neighbors who are older see that this is a survival of the community. And rather than what the Penguins did, get up and keep moving to another community, which is sort of how Littleton grew, everybody moved here, we want to preserve the things that brought people here. Be very careful not to, in our efforts to do something, to get people to move to another island, so to speak. But engaging the way I think this community really has over decades.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, at least my recollection, so I may have this wrong, but I know how it has worked in practice, was I don't think they went out and they commuted after they had a full solution. I think all they recognized was that change was needed. And that first step of getting all of that urgency, there was a communication of, hey, we're going to have our best minds. We're going to take care of this. Don't need to panic. Some folks ended up being distracted. Some folks say, well, you know, they still doubted whether change needed to occur. But there was what I'll call at least way beyond the tipping point of folks that said, yeah, something different is going to be needed. And then there was then a team that was then identified to help coalesce on a particular direction that was going to be taken. And you know, it's the part that I put is you know, with leadership you're kind of handed the torch, but you can't get too far away from the crowd. I'll put it, every once in a while you need to look over your shoulder and make sure there's someone still in the light with you. And so you know, that you know, putting information out there, not having the panic. And you know, at least in our environment, I will tell you that Littleton has a very enviable set of assets. Tom and the group and Sarah and Andy and the others, you know, put their finger on the fact that we have a very enviable community, and the mayor did an eloquent job. At least I didn't hear a report of it, but with the optimists and in describing there's a real core element that folks find enviable. The fact that we have a main street, that we have neighborhoods, that we have core values that say our neighborhoods are wonderful, that we are blessed, not necessarily just the city's fault, but I think we contribute to it to have an excellent school system that's here, and parks, open space, and trails. That doesn't exist in the magnitude that Littleton has, and I would probably go out and I'd probably say nowhere else in the metro region, if not nowhere else in the United States. So we have an enviable set of assets. There's no question about that. How do we take that into the future so that we're preserving that and dealing with those transition areas in the future is, I think, where our challenge is.
Absolutely. Councilman Valdez, you were...
Yeah, I was going to say, it was for the children, as usual. And but what struck me as I was reading the book, because I read stuff with a skeptical eye at the same time, as in brainwash.
I was thinking of you as I was reading this myself. Yeah.
So, and that's what I thought. They took the kids, and they took the way the kids were thinking, and they changed the way they were thinking so that they would help the community all to buy into it. But that I couldn't help but think about our public school system and the federal government and all that stuff. But never mind, I'm starting to digress. But I call it brainwashing.
What would you want the youth of Littleton to be thinking? How would you want to engage them in the real work of building a future that might be threatened by the changing economic times?
What would I want?
Yeah. I mean, just to take the challenge that I think Councilwoman Cole threw out, do youth have a place in this kind of journey forward, whether it's the economic development plan or the kind of challenge of making sure this future that you want to have come true actually does come true, even though there are threats and risks? And I mean, just how would you want to engage the younger set here in Littleton in that?
I would encourage all young people to read and to become logical in their own thinking and not to be open up their brain and have it filled with stuff that is not necessarily true, but then to live their life as though it is true. So I would encourage them to read and to be able to make good decisions on their own, and to do just that, but just to be aware that everything they say is not necessarily true.
Yeah, healthy skepticism. Yeah, Councilman Beckman?
I just want to add that the subtitle of the book is Changing and Succeeding Under Any Condition. And we haven't talked so much about the success piece of this story. For those people that are skeptical or look at this and say, you know, I'm really tired of hearing about change, go to the last third of the book, because it talks about how success breeds success, recognize individuals. They touched on it in the film. Again, it didn't match the book as well, but with the idea of honoring the scouts who went out and took that risk. And it does make a difference when the smallest steps forward are recognized, and it talks a little bit about that process. So from a leadership point of view, I would direct people to that part of it.
That's a great point. Did you think of any analogies here in Littleton, how you would do that as a council? What the direct core
Well,
is?
Phil talked about it with some degree of depth, but there's things we do really well. And if we want to continue to do really well, here are some things that we can do to bring you aboard for continued success. I think that brings another whole dimension to it, rather than negatively talking about the other side of it, the dark side and the challenge. Instead, talk about the success and the opportunity.
That's a great point. I totally underscore that as well. It makes it seem possible. The next person is much more likely to step up and take that risk.
Well, they mentioned it, and again in the book, mentioned briefly at the end of this, they found that was their new culture, was to move from the best to the best, and they actually found better and better as they went. That, to me, is the idea of succeeding.
That's great.
Also on page 3, and I'd highlighted it right off the bat because I thought it was so good. It said, handle the challenges of change well, and you will prosper greatly. Handle it poorly, and you will put yourself and others at risk. That was right off the bat. That was the beginning of the book.
Yeah, that's a great line. Yes,
Well, I still like in the book the way they engage the young people. The young people saw that they could do something. The idea is to engage everybody, find what everybody, certain things each person can do. But the young people, when they got the Heroes Day to welcome back the Scouts, I think we could do more in outreach to youth groups, to school groups, so different kinds of groups, whether they're Scouts, athletic teams, church youth groups, wherever what kind of groups are, working with them to help them see how the city can use them how they can contribute. I didn't want to say use them in that sense, but how they can contribute. Because then they helped get buy-in from their parents, and grandparents, which was really good. Yeah. But if I translate it to Littleton, we go back to the sales tax and all the things that people buy online or in other cities that we don't then get the tax on unless it's a car. If they understood how that really how that adds up, and then like your purchases here, 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 and here, and how that translates into what we can provide or what we can't provide. So I think we have to really dig down and find a way to communicate that, maybe in our own fable.
That's a great point. And to be honest, the days of the young being 20 years away from leadership roles is gone. When you have 23-year-olds starting multi-million-dollar companies, when you have 25-year-olds training the older generation in companies on how to use the new technology, that distance between engaging the young and engaging your next set of leaders is about a 2 or 3 year span. So I think on a number of fronts, it's a wise strategy to engage the youth of your community.
Well, and if I can comment more, unfortunately, I was the only one on council who got to go to the Rocky Mountain West Urban Leadership Conference, where they had some incredible examples of how young people in a particular city essentially led the effort that revitalized economically and otherwise. But some of the city staff were there, and I'm hoping maybe we can get them to help share some of those ideas.
Well, there's some great leadership lessons about the power of storytelling here from.
Yeah, the footnote in it's covered in the book, not in the movie. So you can tell the folks that did the screenplay that they left something important out, which is in the book, the youth are the ones that challenge the most deep-rooted beliefs and change that to make the scout exercise successful or even possible. And if you kind of follow that thought, is it's those that think maybe a little bit younger, is to recognize that ideas can have some elements that were there, and it was interesting how that was nurtured in the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so to build on that, in what Phil just said, the young people had to persuade the parents to get the fish, which would feed the scouts. And this was the big confrontation because you only ever gave the fish to your own children. You never gave them to anybody else. So metaphorically, symbolically, whatever, that is a really big piece, which is connected to what I was saying about exploring these issues more. So,
yeah, there's all sorts of corollaries of the ability to just think of one's own self-interest rather than the kind of larger attempt to become the community you want to be. Is you'll face that dilemma 1,000 times over, obviously, and how people come to embrace it.
Just to shift from that a bit, I think it was kind of interesting on page 78 how the colony broke out, 30% could see a new way, 30% were digesting what they had heard, 20% were confused,
seen those polls on
10%
every
were
issue.
skeptical but not hostile, and 10% were, the little penguin no-no. They were convinced this was just completely absurd. So I found it fascinating how, and then how you coalesce that, how you bring that together, and how, you talk about the youth. And at the end of the day, it was really the adults, of course, who were the engine behind it, but largely because they wanted to have a home for their kids to grow up in, and also for them to learn how to survive, because they are going to have to keep moving and moving and moving. So it just kind of circles back around.
That's a great, I chuckled at that same thing. I imagine that's a standard polling response for any number of issues.
But it's interesting, too, how it comes back to what you've put together there. It really is that the correlation is kind of scary.
Yeah. Well, also, and Dan and I were talking about, the second book of Courage, too, about just being able to kind of drop the temperature in a room and to know that when you as a community of Littleton are on different sides of an issue and people see it and they're passionate about those, to just remember that's a normal part of how we're constructed, and not to need to develop those divisions. That gives you the ability, taking that act of courage gives you the ability to kind of stand in that fire and kind of provide the kind of leadership the community needs. And any tool that you can have in your toolkit, we figured would be kind of a useful thing to bring up. So,
well, I think this has been great.
Yeah.
Well, we're up here talking about penguins, but I think I'm very happy that council has embraced this. I'm a little, here, this book.
It's a risk. It was great.
But I think that's one of the things that we understand is that this is none of this is easy. None of this is something we all got up here knowing how to do. We're figuring it out, and we're doing the best that we can. And the more we learn and the more we understand, the better the job we'll do. And I think that these lessons are just invaluable, and we can all take away our own personal growth from this. And I so appreciate all the work that you guys have done with us and for us. And it's been wonderful working with you, and I know we continue to work with you. So I really, really appreciate that. Unless you have anything else.
No,
go
just
ahead,
deep
Matt.
sense of gratitude as well to have this opportunity. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You guys are awesome. Okay. Thank you, Council. Thank you, everyone, for staying and hanging around with us. And we are adjourned.